here we are, we're on our final panel, and it's appropriately titled Looking Ahead, Building Alternatives and Transforming Structures, in part because there is no final conversation. We are looking forward, we are dreaming for and building for systems that are transformative for all of us. And so to steward us through this conversation will be Meg Satterthwaite, who we heard opening the conference and is an incredible legal empowerment practitioner and visionary. Meg is the faculty director of the Bernstein Institute and of the Center for Human Rights and Global Justice. She's also a professor of clinical law and the director of the Global Justice Clinic at NYU. Meg, she's also a mom and a runner and many things. So Meg wears many, many hats, and through it all, she practices humility and works with a deep recognition of the knowledge that is embedded within community. And she's been a total amazing co-conspirator and mentor in this work. So Meg, really excited to shift it over to you as you facilitate this final convo. Thank you, Meg.
Thanks so much, Sukti. That was way more than I deserved and greatly appreciated. Thanks so much. But as you said, Sukti, this is the last panel for this discussion, but it's really an opening into the longer discussion that we hope will continue and that we know is continuing. It's been really wonderful to see the chat happening, to see people WhatsApping each other, to see Twitter. It's just, it's great that there are all these conversations continuing, starting. And so today we have some really incredible justice warriors with us to talk about this kind of forward-leaning transformative visions that they're working on, and also to address the question of when legal systems are actively harming people, when are alternatives in this moment needed to address that active harm? And so we'll hear about some really important practices, some important initiatives that folks have taken and get some conversation going. So to do that, I want to ask each of the panelists, everyone maybe could turn your videos on now, and we're actually going to have a speed round for you each to introduce yourself. And so what I would love you to do is to just, I'll introduce each of you extremely briefly. If you could then tell us about the legal empowerment or the justice fight you're engaged in, just really quickly, 2 minutes each, and then we'll start with a deeper set of discussions. So who do we have here? I'm hoping everyone can turn their video on. So first we have Gerardo Reyes Chavez, who's a key member leader of the Coalition of Immokalee Workers in Florida. We also have Matthew Stark Blumin, apologies, who's general counsel with the Coalition of Immokalee Workers. We have Richard Midkiff, who's president and CEO of RSMCC Paralegal Consulting. I believe you're in Florida also, right?
I am.
Okay, Florida is showing up on this panel. We have Nixon Boumba, who's an organizer and has worked with Collective Justice Mean in Haiti. And I just have to give a shout out to Boumba because he's one of the most important teachers I've ever had around working with community and working for justice. And then we have Ariadna Godreau Aubert, who is founder and executive director of Ayuda Legal in Puerto Rico. So Gerardo, if you could start by just saying real briefly, what justice fight are you involved in?
For us, well, the fight has been for fair food for the past more than 20 years now. You know, we started in 2001 asking Taco Bell to join onto being part of that solution to condition the purchasing of the tomatoes they were buying from Florida. As a community, Immokalee was fighting since 1993 for about a decade before that juncture where I came in to meet the coalition, because there was a case of modern day slavery that happened to a few workers that the coalition helped to bring to prosecution. That was the second case. There's been many more. We're going to have a chance to talk more about that. But our fight has to do with creating the environment by bringing leverage from the market, by creating power with consumers to then change conditions with workers. And we as workers are basically the engineers of sorts that created this system, which we will talk more about. So thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. And now we'll turn to Matthew.
Thanks, and thank you, Gerardo. I know time is at a premium in the introduction, so I can say, you know, as General Counsel to the CIW, the Legal Empowerment Movement, and struggle I'm involved in is Gerardo's and that of the farm workers with the CIW. And I was very grateful to Gerardo for inviting me to join him on this panel today, because we are here at a law school, and I guess in solidarity support with and from a law review and many law students. And so it will be exciting to talk about what it means to be a lawyer in supporting the work of farm workers and worker organizations as they create alternative programs and strategies. So that is my work. I'm very blessed to be able to do it, and I will look forward to talking more.
Thank you so much. Over to you, Richard.
Make sure I'm on here. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for this opportunity and all of the work that all of you are doing. It's so important. My work is structured around prison reform and adequate representation for people going through hard times and appellate and post-conviction matters. I gained my knowledge in this after serving 23 years in prison and was able to successfully have myself released 15 years early. However, it was a short victory because 10 months later, they overturned my release. And through the work of the community and looking ahead, as the theme is for this panel and this symposium, the community came together, they rallied around me, people from all over the world, and it really opened up my eyes to that there's a bigger purpose than just what I'm doing. There's work that needs to be done in every area and every industry to help bring about effective change. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now I'd like to call on Boumba.
Thank you, Meg, and thank you, everyone. I feel honored to be part of this panel this afternoon because it is very inspiring me to learn from other practitioners, other activists around the world. And to respond to your question, Meg, I think for the last 20 years, I've been involved in for legal empowerment, particularly to seek for justice, social justice, ending exclusion, and create a world of love and justice. But the past 10 years have been particularly involved in legal empowerment in terms of environmental justice, anti-sexual activist movement, and also gender and sexuality, particularly with the LGBT movement in this country. My work is can be wisdom and movement building the bridge between different kind of injustice and to create a movement for deep social change in my country.
Thanks so much, Boumba. And on to you, Ariadna.
Hello, everyone. So I'm really grateful to be here. So the work that we do here in Puerto Rico with Ayuda Legal is basically working towards housing and land justice. Puerto Rico has faced several disasters in the last 5 years, like major hurricanes, earthquakes, now the pandemic. But of course, there's also an austerity crisis, which is making nearly 10% of the population leave the island. So we are working towards that with a human rights perspective.
Amazing. Okay, thanks so much to each of you. So what I'd love to do now is invite you to tell us a brief story about the kinds of systemic injustice that the communities you work with are facing, and how you've built alternatives or how you envision transformation in the face of exclusion, abuse, and oppression. So Gerardo, let's start with you for this round.
Sorry, thank you. I mean, there's plenty of examples. The one that comes to mind that's more recent, is the case of modern day slavery that happened in the onion fields in Georgia, near Valdosta, that impacted over 71,000 workers. It was a huge network that was impacted, was forcing workers to dig onions with their bare hands while using guns, threatening to kill them. Some workers that were there died because of heat exhaustion. Workers that were there also experienced being raped. And all of those things, are part of what happens in a space of work where there's no application of the laws, where there's no respect for the contracts, for example. And this is not the only case. I was talking about how I got involved 21 years ago, because I met workers who were forced to work at gunpoint. A debt was imposed on them, and we can talk about many stories about situations of abuse that take place. But the common denominator of all of this is workers are powerless in these circumstances because the tools that are supposed to protect them, and because the contracts that they are coming into the US to work with are never receiving any kind of overseeing, and workers don't have any kind of research. So our story today, it's two things. In one end, we have what we have built as a community, the Fair Food Program, and the Fair Food Program, it's something that responds and addresses all the limitations of the law. In fact, it brings the law back to life in terms of things that are written but have never been respected. The Fair Food Program being a collaboration between workers represented by the CIW and the growers represented by the Florida Tomato Growers Exchange, where it all started in 2011 to be implemented. And then 14 of the largest corporations, including Taco Bell, McDonald's, Burger King, Subway, even Walmart, basically 20% of the market, more or less, is participating in buying tomatoes, conditioning purchase into zero tolerance for modern day slavery, child labor, and sexual assault. And it's been working in an incredibly powerful way. We want to not have to talk about stories of workers being forced to work at gunpoint and under threats of death, being fearful for their lives while they feed the country. That's the work that we have ahead. And I want to be able to one day have that question and have a different answer. Meanwhile, we need to keep pushing.
Thank you so much. Matthew, would you like to answer that question?
Sure, thanks. And Gerardo, thank you. And maybe part of what I can do to build on what Gerardo said is to say a little bit about the CIW's fair food agreements and how it is that they operate to bring this market power to bear. So as Gerardo said, the CIW has agreements with 14 of the largest produce retailers in the country, and what those agreements do is really rather incredible, in that they require of those buyers, basically two things. One of those two things has two pieces, but two things very broadly speaking. The first is the penny per pound premium that the CIW is so well known for, which is a bonus paid directly by the retailers to the farm workers to eradicate economic insecurity, longstanding grinding poverty in the fields. But the second, which Gerardo described, is to promise to buy from farms that are in compliance with the CIW's code of conduct, which farm workers themselves designed as their vision of the rights and dignity that they deserve to have. And Gerardo was there for that whole process. And yes, one of the things in that code of conduct is a zero tolerance policy for forced labor. But what does that mean in practice, and why is it so transformative? How is it that those agreements make zero tolerance real? Because the truth is that most companies out there say that they have zero tolerance for forced labor. You're not going to find a company that says that they tolerate forced labor in their supply chain. But what does that mean? You know, in the Fair Food Program, what it means is that because farm workers set up this program in their vision of what real enforcement means, it means there's a 24/7 complaint line. It means that there's annual auditing speaking to the workers, where workers are at the forefront of driving that monitoring. And it means, and this is where I come back to the agreements, that if a case of forced labor is found on a participating farm, and a farm is suspended from the program because there is an immediate suspension, that's what zero tolerance means. You're kicked out of the program for forced labor, that the 14 buyers who have signed up to this program must cut off purchases from that farm. And so zero tolerance now means an immediate loss of 14 of your largest customers if you are a Florida tomato grower. And it means having to face the scrutiny of a truly worker-driven monitoring and enforcement program that really has the mechanisms to determine whether those abuses are taking place. So, you know, that alternative, those agreements really are revolutionary in the binding and enforceable and rigorous mechanisms they set up that are, you know, just absolutely without precedent. So yeah, it's incredible, and I'm delighted, very blessed really to have the ability to talk more about it, but we'll hear from others and we can continue.
Thank you so much, Matthew. And just both of you have really spoken about so strongly about how workers themselves took those exclusions from labor law and then also the skirting of it, active skirting of it, and created binding rules. It's an incredible story, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about it. But first we'll turn to Richard. Can you tell us a brief story?
Absolutely. So I primarily work in the appellate field of law, and having gone to prison myself at 19 years old with no formal education, no family support, or any support from the Department of Corrections, I took it upon myself to educate myself. And as I continue to work in law, I started realizing in prison, there was a need for something else, and it was viable programs. And I spent 10 years of my time creating these programs with the idea of giving men the tools they need to succeed while they're incarcerated, so they'll have the tools to succeed once they're released. And it's a very slippery slope, and you have to work closely with the administration. Here in Florida, a lot of the prisons, and we all know there's a major mass incarceration problem in the United States, Florida being one of the top 3, but with the smallest land mass, still housing over 100,000 people in the Department of Corrections. So we want to cut down on recidivism. We want to give people the tools that they need. When I came out, I thought, well, what can we do now to bridge that gap even further? So in my work, I now continue to do paralegal work, but we work with senators and local politicians, local jails. We work with the prisons to continue providing tools for family unification, education, critical thinking, critical listening, finances, just trying to provide the tools that are needed. I learned myself after coming home that it's not as easy as one thinks. And fortunately for me, I had a craft that I could step right into and create a business for myself that's sustainable as a paralegal. And I get the amazing opportunity to work with some great attorneys throughout the state of Florida on projects that are such needed: police brutality, trying to change the archaic felony murder law, trying to make sure that juveniles do not get what's termed as a de facto life sentence. And that's probably been one of my biggest passions in law, is the US Supreme Court ruling that it's an 8th Amendment violation to give a juvenile life without parole for a non-homicide offense. You take a child whose brain's not fully developed, you put them in an environment where they have transient behavior, they're susceptible to peer pressure, and they get in trouble. Next thing you know, they have a life sentence. They are going to do decades more than an adult offender who caught the same crime at the age of 30. So when the United States Supreme Court made this ruling, and the case was Graham versus Florida, an interesting fact, at the time, there were 132 or 33 juveniles sentenced to life without parole in this country. 77 of them were from Florida. So that tells you there's something wrong with the criminal justice here in Florida. Florida court's answers to that was to resentence these children from life to 100 years, which is a de facto life sentence. We're working to change that because if you look at the brain science on it, a child's mind doesn't fully develop till they're 24. In my case, about 27, 28. And we want to see them raise that age to offenders that are 22, 23, to give these people an opportunity to re-enter society. But they need something more. You just can't throw them out and say, okay, you're done, here's $50 and a bus ticket. There has to be something in place to help people get housing, to get jobs, to get an income, to get food. And these things are very much lacking in the state of Florida right now. One of the programs that I'm honored to be a part of is a mentorship program within the probation and parole office. And being on probation myself, I continue to try to work closely with the administration to bridge that gap. Because the thing I realize, it's not going to be resolved by one person or a politician. It's going to take everybody involved, and those closest to the problem are the ones with the best solution. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So much in there that you said with a lot of wisdom. Thank you. Ariadna.
So most of the time we're fighting corporations, and that's something that we're seeing overall in Puerto Rico because of what has happened with the public debt and unsustainable debt. A lot of the things that are undergoing in the island are policies that are basically attracting foreign investors and trying to replace, or I would say exclude, the Puerto Rican community. This is very important because of our colonial situation. We are binded by many of the actions that are taken in the United States. For example, under the administration of Donald Trump, Puerto Rico was advertised as the whole island as an opportunity zone, which is basically a tax scheme to make the island more attractive for investors. At the same time, for cryptocurrency, Airbnbs are in some jurisdictions 28 to 30% of the rentals that are available. And you have a community that is basically Spanish-speaking community, where a high poverty level is in place, and at the same time, like, you take these disasters and you let them unattended. Like, we still have people 5 years after Major Hurricane Maria living under blue tarps, and it's not like hundreds, it's thousands of people. So what's happening is that a lot of people are facing like housing injustice, the actual dispossession of the place where you live. And that's happening because of foreclosures. That's happening because of evictions. That's happening because people just can simply like afford rent. And because of lack of social mobility, it's easier to go like from Puerto Rico to Orlando than to move Orlando, Florida, than to move within the same island. So we are seeing like a lot of the people just being forced to leave. So when we face that systemically as human rights lawyers, as advocates, we are like grounded on the right to stay and on the right to return, because leaving home when you live in an island is basically actually leaving home, is leaving that geographical space that is limited, by the Caribbean Sea. A lot of the work that we do is throughout non-traditional legal services, through community legal empowerment strategies. We try to power map a lot. So we try to face not only what's the injury that's being caused, but who's causing the injury and who has the responsibility. So I'm thinking, for example, the way that we can accompany a woman who was sick with a chronic illness, who had to conceal from her family because of shame, the fact that she couldn't be paying her mortgage, and how she came to Ayuda Legal Puerto Rico because she went to a protest of a feminist group that is not related to Ayuda Legal Puerto Rico, who were protesting in front of the banks. And she came here because she didn't even realize that that was a possibility, protesting financial institutions, and even less like trying to defend herself before a financial institution. And I'm thinking about her process, like the first time she cried in a workshop because we talked about the right to housing, and never, ever, ever has she heard something like the right to housing that exists in Puerto Rico. Quick note, we used to have a constitution that mentioned the right to housing, but the United States canceled that from our constitution as a condition to accept the current status of Puerto Rico in the 1950s. Having that narrative shift is part of what we do, because, you know, legal representation is good, can be effective, but like lacks a lot. There's a humanity that is lost in the fact that people are being called to courtrooms to see if they will have a roof in a month or no. And we try to fight the system by naming the system and also naming who's responsible, like the state. And in the case of a colony, that state is both Puerto Rican government and the US. And people like feel that they're moving from shame to grace, but also that they're moving from shame to power, and a power that comes with the right to demand accountability. So that's part of the work that we do.
Wow, incredibly powerful. These stories are just amazing. Thank you so much, Ariadna. Boumba, let's move on to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Ariadna, for your story, because we share in common different aspects. We as Asian people, we just came from a traumatic disaster in 2010, when in behind of Haitian people, international actors and government and elites in Haiti, they plan to rebuild the country and open the country to business and trying to make the country more attractive for foreign investors. Everything was happening without any information sharing to Haitian people. And at that time, we took this decision in 2012 to put in place a coalition, because it's from our culture. We need to be united, unified to be able to fight for our rights to life, and rights also to protect what we consider as our common good. It is where we started this coalition called Mining Justice Collective. I've been part of this collective from 2012 until 2019, and our main work is trying to break this silo between Port-au-Prince-based organization and also very marginalized and outside what we're calling in the Haiti situation, the pays en dehors, which we're trying to put information available for people. And our main work should go to see where information are available and take this information and make it accessible for people from very marginalized people. We are doing this work with support, with a very solidarity as a key values from Haitian people and also from people outside of Haiti, such the Global Justice Clinic, and with Meg, with Ali, and to go everywhere in the country and to disseminate this information for people. I don't know, Haiti is one of country where we are living this structural, systemic lack to access to information. We don't know what's happening in the country, even though they said we're supposed to know what the law says, but the law is not available for Haitian people because it is in French the vast majority of Haitian people, they are speaking Creole. And also the complexity of the language, it's also a great barrier. Even though myself, I wasn't able to have access to this information without support from other actors who can target and follow the very powerful actors in Haiti and outside of the country. Our work is like put information available to build empowerment from community-based organization, community-based actors, to be able to defend the rights and also to know the process to defend the rights. The second is like trying to develop, community movement. Community movement, for example, trying to put in touch people from different spaces and to be able to be connected on this common issue, this common interest with the protecting their life in front of mining exploitation, land grab, and to be and to defend the life. Our work is trying to secure rights and also protect rights and also building the power from the ground. And this work was we were at some point successfully, and we have a lot of challenges in front of us to take over, to break this silo where we put Haitian people, because they organize this huge propaganda that mining exploitation, extractivism will bring development in their life and resolve structural, social, and economic problems we are living in the country. And also without any information about the impact of this industry and the lives of people in the country. And another challenge we had to face, I already mentioned that we speak Creole and some people in Haiti speak French, but Haiti, we are not familiar to mining exploitation, for example, extractivism. We have a long history of resistance against imposer vision, imposer development project, but we didn't have this capacity to do that. And we support as well from actors, mainly the NYU Global Justice Clinic, to try to take this information from Spanish speaker, Spanish country, English country, to translate this information and put it available for people to watch as popular cinema, movie, and go to the communities and to do screening for people to have access to the information. I remember the first time we heard, and we have testimony from other communities outside of Haiti. It was bring by NYU Law School, who visited Papua New Guinea. It's very far from Haiti. And when Haitian people listening and watch these videos, they saw themselves throughout this injustice, imposed injustice throughout extractive industry in this country. Our work is trying to mainly having information, make this information available for people, accessible for people, and also building the social movement from the ground, and also connected to other social movement, building alliances beyond Haiti and the Caribbean, and trying to do advocacy. Advocacy for us, or we can target the powerful actors to trying to impose this vision to Haitian people, like World Bank, like using Inter-American Commission for Human Rights. It's in Haiti, even though we don't believe in the court in Haiti, or we can move the line, from the injustice toward justice. It's something very strategic we are doing so far. And this is the work, Mani. We can talk more about that, and we can see the similarity between different experiences from Latin America and the Caribbean and you.
Thank you so much, Boumba. So much in there that you've shared, and we'll come back to you to go a little deeper on some pieces of that. So a couple of specific questions for each of you, starting with Gerardo again. So you've spoken frequently about CIW's insistence on the humanity of farm workers. who are systematically exploited, cheated, and as you mentioned in your opening, also enslaved in the United States. Can you talk a little more about this model of worker-driven social responsibility as an expression of humanity? How have workers who've been intentionally excluded from US labor protections used that power, as you already talked about, to organize partnerships and campaigns? And what's the role of worker-to-worker education, of auditing, of complaints, solidarity efforts? How concretely has CIW turned that humanity into action for rights?
Well, first of all, we have created a space in which people feel that their humanity is valued in the form of bringing elements of organizing that are from the community, popular education, drawings, to bring people in that speak different languages. Our community is very rich in that regard, and we're very poor in other regards. And that's why we must continue to fight. In all of these, we have, and when I was listening to Boumba, I was thinking about all the things that we do here in Immokalee, that are very present and coming from Haiti, coming from Guatemala, Southern Mexico, Central America. And is those experiences that make people be part of something bigger. They understand themselves and their humanity, as something valuable that we're all trying to protect. There was a march many years ago. I'm just going to mention this really quickly. We were in tour in California. That's part of what we do to create power, which is something that I also want to mention. This is not an issue of us wanting to do the right thing because this is moral. It's something that people should embrace because it's a good thing and it eliminates abuses that we don't want to see or suffer. It's a matter of power, it's about building the power that's necessary for workers so that they can have their autonomy in terms of what's needed on codes like this. It's not the other way around. And it works because it was crafted precisely like that, by the experiences that we were able to share and run in different languages in the weekly meetings, by bringing a marimba and a little marimba that accompanies that for the melody from Guatemala and build it here with the community. People will come to participate with us and form a group. All of these things mean something when you are asking somebody, will you stand in this fight with us? Will you go on a tour with us? Will you speak up? Will you fight together with all of us? And people get engaged because they know that is the goal. We used to talk about human rights, and the Universal Declaration was basically just an aspiration. Always, it has always been. There has never been a system that comes to guarantee that our human and labor rights are protected until we started to push the market to do the right thing. And then we got an agreement with Taco Bell, and then all the other agreements that have happened since, including Walmart, which gave us the opportunity to expand all the protections that we have to 7 other states, now 8 states, and there's conversations that are ongoing about these protections being implemented in farms in other places in the United States in the production of flowers. And so that is an ongoing conversation of expansion. At the same time, workers in the dairy industry, the construction industry, also in Vermont with migrant justice, Setul, in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, workers in Lesotho, within the context of unions, and in Lesotho also same context, but also with the main focus on eliminating sexual harassment. And in every reality, all of these things that we have created as workers for our reality to eliminate the abusive conditions have resulted in protections that are being implemented in other parts of the world. We want to share this. We want this to work, but we also need to be to be careful in terms of what is it that results really in protecting the humanity of the workers that we're aiming to elevate that humanity. There's a lot of conversations going on around the country about social responsibility. CSR has been around for decades, the corporate social responsibility approach. It has proven that it does not eliminate, it does not include workers. That's why it doesn't eliminate. It was not designed to address human rights abuses or to eliminate crimes that are going on inside these operations in agriculture. They were not. They were designed to protect the brands from public, to create a public space, disassociating it from the responsibility. It's time to change that. And for us, when I think about what makes workers stand, what makes somebody, like myself, I mean, I've been working in the field since I was a kid. And harvesting oranges, tomatoes, watermelons. I've been cheated with my wages. And the reason why we met the coalition was because we met these workers of the case of modern day slavery. So for us, it's when we see that we don't have to give up our dignity, our freedom within participating farms in 8 states now, and in the future more. That is what gives us the hope, and that is what truly protects our humanity. This is a conversation that goes beyond. It touches so many different points in communities that have always been disenfranchised, like the Latino communities here in Florida, the Haitian community, coming from Guatemala and Mexico mainly. And we have, go through a 2-year, period of like fighting to have access to basic things so that we don't die. So I think that, the last thought that I want to share on that is to truly, put a value on the humanity of people. We need to create, to push for systemic change that is led by the bottom, by those who are suffering the consequences of abusive behavior. And we need to think beyond the law also. We don't need to limit ourselves. In this booklet, we have rights like shade in the fields. That doesn't exist under any law. It was not through legislation that it happened. We eliminated the overfilling of the bucket, 10% less tomatoes, an effective 10% increase of payment for workers in the fields in every bucket. And that doesn't exist by law. We have COVID protections. I'm not going to get into that. Heat protections also. I'm going to stop there. But all of this is possible only because the power the workers needed to be able to defend themselves was created with the community, with consumers all over the country, and with people that think outside, what the norm is. When it doesn't work, we need to think outside of it and bring out new ideas. And all of this, it's been that for us.
Wow, that's incredible, Gerardo. Thank you. And that idea of moving the law aside, of not seeing that as a limit, right? That actually often the law excludes people. And so demanding humanity, dignity, and then making that actually enforceable, that's incredible. And actually, I'll turn now to Matt to talk a little bit about how that works. How do those fair food agreements become legally enforceable? I think you're still muted, Matt.
Thanks, sorry about that. Yeah, I mean, on the subject of how the law sort of interacts with this alternative structure, right? When CIW started organizing, as I understand it from Gerardo, so Gerardo, come in and step on my toes if I'm getting this history wrong, but the initial efforts of the CIW were to protest as workers to the growers, right? March to growers' houses, demand increases in pay, And there was some progress made in doing that, but it was not systemic progress. And there are a number of reasons for that. One of them is that farm workers in Florida, and indeed in most of the United States, lack the right to collective bargaining under the United States labor laws. They can't unionize, or they can, but they don't have the right to, to actually enforce the union collective bargaining process. So CIW had no choice but to come up with an alternative structure because the law did not provide for bargaining on equal footing between employers and employees. But what they did was to have such a radical imagination to think that, well, if there's not a legal structure in place to have, the type of traditional employee bargaining, we're going to imagine who really has the power to change our conditions, and we're going to make our demands there. And so to answer your question about sort of like how do these agreements become binding, they become binding and enforceable the same way any private contract does, which is just through the basic rule of law, under common law, that when two parties make an arm's length agreement, that agreement is legally enforceable. And I think there is a great lesson there for people organizing in so many different areas where the law seems to be so constraining. But in fact, if you have the power to win an agreement through pressure, there really are not that many limits to what it is you are able to do. And the CIW is confronting a landscape of legal exclusion that was not only its right to negotiate, a collective bargaining agreement, but also just farm workers not being covered by so many of the health and safety and other workplace laws just to begin with. Forget about their ability to negotiate over them with employers. There just are a number of laws that exclude farm workers from their protections, including their basic health and safety. And that's just like what's written on the books. Then you take another step, right? Like, it's not like forced labor is legal in the United States. It's illegal, but it's illegal, but it's just that, it is allowed to happen because the laws are not enforced, whether because law enforcement is not paying attention to them, or just because of the relative positions of power between individuals. There are many reasons, and so many studies have shown this, that the violation of workers' rights, the wage theft that Gerardo described, is the experience of the typical farm worker in the United States. It's not the exception to the rule. It is the rule that if you work in the fields in the United States, it's likely that your rights are being violated. But I think the one last thing I'd like to refer back to is, Gerardo mentioned the protections that the CIW has achieved against rising temperatures in a time of climate change. And I just want to make sure we just have a little bit of time to talk about that, because here's another example where, the law in the United States at the federal level says absolutely nothing about workers' rights to take breaks in high heat. It can be 100 degrees in the fields, and workers do not have the right to a regularly scheduled rest break to ensure they don't overheat. And as a result, they're dying of heat stroke in record numbers as temperatures continue to rise. But it's precisely because of the power the CIW won to have a workers' code of conduct, right? And not to be beholden to the statutes on the books, that the CIW was able to evolve its code to contain mandatory rest breaks in the high heat season in the Southeast, which is the 6 months between May and October, where workers are taking breaks. And there's something incredible about that, having worked with Gerardo on the process of really learning from him and the CIW's leaders on what those rules should say. They say something that you will never find in the event Congress ever does pass heat stress breaks, which seems doubtful, since they can't pass a bill even asking, they have not been able to pass a bill asking OSHA to pass even a standard, let alone that it would entitle workers to mandatory breaks, which is that it says that when workers take these breaks, the the dumpers, the farm supervisors who collect tomatoes from the workers actually have to get off the trucks. And the reason it says that is because otherwise, workers will have an incentive to keep working, and there will be, a system set up that seems like it's still expecting workers to work, even though they may be being told that there's breaks. And that's because workers created that standard, and workers knew what it would take for this standard to be real. So it's not, when Gerardo speaks about the richness and the humanity of the farm worker community in Immokalee, he's also speaking about the wisdom and the expertise that workers have to know which solutions will actually change their conditions. And to me, that's most impressive about what the CIW has done, is to take their own knowledge and expertise about what power and what rules are required to transform their lives, and to insist that those be the rules and not the rules that have been laid down, for them.
Incredible. And I think it's as a law professor who is constantly learning from communities in the way that you're talking about, I hope that we can really take this in, that is the kind of knowledge that's really needed here. And it's not contained in a book, right? It's contained in experience and wisdom and accumulated knowledge and sharing of knowledge, as Gerardo was talking about. So Ariadna, I've managed to learn from you as well in the Zoom world over the past year and a half. And I was struck by something you said recently. You said the law is slow in solving injustice, but fast in advancing oppression. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how you've used critical legal empowerment to try to construct a just recovery from disaster in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, and this is something that it's happening as I'm listening to the colleagues, like, when we are advocates and we work with any kind of legal strategy, even if we're lawyers or we're not, we're always calling for the law to be able to see people, to see workers that are working in unsafe conditions, to see families who are at risk of having no food or having no shelter. In our case, to see survivors of disasters and to finally do something. But sometimes when law finally sees people, when law looks at them eye to eye, it's oftentimes to oppress. So once we get law to have, once we bring the attention of the government, oftentimes what we have to do is basically shield people from that awful effect that law can have. And I'm thinking about very specific things. We can be voicing for months, for years sometimes, that our community has no access to utilities because the government has failed to respond after the earthquakes, and they are still living in informal camps. And we bring that to the media, or we bring strategic litigation, or we do Know Your Rights workshop. And next thing that happens is that the municipalities, the local government, goes in and tries to remove the kids because of the unsanitary conditions where the families have been living for long. So this constant game of trying to shed light over injustices and at the same time, like, to prevent our communities to have the full-blown effect that law basically has on people, what is constantly reminding us is the fact that law, the first encounter that a lot of people has with law is an oppressive encounter. It is law that incarcerates people based on their race. It is law that removes children based on the gender, on the social condition, on the disability status of their mothers. It is basically law that says who has a right to have ownership and who doesn't have a right or can prove that is an owner. So when we were working, and the work that we're doing towards a just recovery, which is this idea that people have a right to be part of the processes that have to do with the recovery of their homes, but also the recovery of the place they call community, is grounded on the knowledge that we need to change the system. because the system is trying, for example, to move people from being owners to being tenants of the state. And as we know, tenants of the state, people living in public housing, have very little rights, and they are criminalized over and over again. So we're trying to find actual remedies where people like can participate of, and that become long-term remedies, and not a way that the state is trying to hide or manage injustices in a very convenient way. Many times that also needs that also requires like to change the way that I perceive myself as a lawyer and the way that we think of ourselves as lawyers. You know, when we were going through law schools, we were trained to lead, but to lead in a very oppressive way, to be the only ones talking in the court, not to let clients, we call people clients, in fact, to represent people instead of accompanying them. So we have to change the whole way and realize that oftentimes our own persona can be very oppressive for communities. So one of the things that we're trying to do in this very long process of disaster recovery is to put the legal tools in the hands of people who can change that narrative. You know, why would people need to pay a lawyer $50 to receive information that should be out there anyways? Why should people like have a lawyer so that they are able to speak in a mediation process against a financial institution? Why should people have a lawyer to be able to bring an actual pencil and paper to a loss mitigation process with a bank? So our idea is to get the lawyer out of the equation. And as I'm listening to you all, and I always have like in the back of my head the question of perpetuity, you know, like when we do legal empowerment work, it's hard, but we know we need to do this knowing that we can't be there forever. And if we're planning as if we were going to be there forever, then we are failing, because we are like perpetuating a system that is grounded on an inequity that solely depends and very like promisingly economically for lawyers, like it solely depends on lawyers. So we have to shift that, and that requires taking ourselves out of the equation. When I'm thinking about Ayuda Legal Puerto Rico, and I have I am the founder of the organization, and I've been here for 8 years now. I'm thinking about this is a project that should not be always thinking about perpetuity. Ayuda Legal Puerto Rico is not forever. Politically, we cannot be forever, because if we are here to be forever, then we fail. We are doing the same thing with a social justice like swag, you know? And I'm thinking how to push it forward, developing capacities that we can share with others. And as I'm listening to you all, like it's so complicated, you know, what's happening out there, it's so complicated that I think that the biggest challenge that we have right now, I'm thinking about myself, is when do we know that our time like to say, okay, so we did it till now it's time to pass those capacities is happening. Is this like a circle that's gonna go on and on and on forever? And I'm thinking, you know, about that piece that has to do with disaster recovery, and also hearing you, and the fact that none of us is working with very innovative issues. We are working with basic human rights. We're not talking about, you know, human development. We're not talking about the right to rest. We are not talking about abolishing the prison industrial complex. We're not even talking about abolishing colonialism itself. We're talking about having people the capacity to eat and to have a shelter and to sleep safely at night and not to be like brutalized by the police. When is that time? I think it's that question. It's a question that needs to be answered in community, and this is the community. You know, this is part of the community. So yeah.
Wow, so much here, so much here. So Boumba, turning to you, you actually mentioned this term "mun andea" when you were talking, and you've talked about how legal empowerment is important because it really moves people who are outside the system, who are pushed outside, as we're talking about even humanity sometimes, right? It pushes them out. So can you talk a little bit about how you see the legal system placing rural people in Haiti outside the protection of the law? And here I'm also thinking, Boumba, about which law are we talking about, right? We're talking about the law of Haiti, but we're also talking about the global international order. You're talking about extractivism, and that involves, you know, a lot of international capitalist structures. So what is it that social movements are doing to insist on not having that outside, but bringing people inside into the protection of the system that actually recognizes their humanity?
Thank you, Meg. Actually, an association to humanity, in other words, is dignity. You know, and when Haitian people are fighting for their rights, they are fighting for humanity and also for dignity. Become more human, because the system, the oppression system, create different category of humanity. And one of main characteristics of Haitian society is exclusion. We are living in a country where there are different society. The included society is like institutionally having access to rights, some basic rights, and the vast majority of people are excluded, you know, to the access to the rights, to the access to dignity, to access to humanity. And one thing I can share, and I really like to say I'm a social justice activist, because we are fighting for what we miss to live as a human being. We are fighting for what we miss to live as, you know, with our dignity. And I share this when in a conversation with Meg. I was born at a very countryside, and what we call countryside in Haiti is like, you know, the pays en dehors. The countryside is the pays en dehors. We are outside of everything, and I had to leave my countryside to come to Port-au-Prince at 7 years old and to have access to education, for example. And until 1990, when the first election of Aristide in the country, if you were born from the countryside, you were marked and your birth certificate as a peasant. Even though you become the prime minister, you become president of the country, but it's like, you know, social marks, you create this kind of discriminatory and also stigmatization on yourself because you're from the countryside. And when they are talking about social development, economic development, like extractivism, they try to impose to the Moderator people living in the countryside because they don't have access to information. They don't know how to using the law, or they don't know how to using the courts, and also having assistance from a legal a lawyer or a lawyer. It's something very complicated. And that costs a lot of money to have access to this thing. When I'm talking about the Moderator, we are talking about this kind of legal system, court system, and society will put people outside of what they need to live as a human being. And our work from and from the Mining Justice Collective and other work we are doing, our fighting is trying to put those people, keeping very far from what they need to live as a human being. So take those people, create this movement of power, collective power, sharing power, and to try to change the law. And we have seen a lot of success and different other points in this country where the law was shaped by the movement, by people who were affected by the law, and to trying to be an actor in the future. I was talking about this birth certificate that was changing, with a huge social movement, huge political movement who want to change the norm, the structural norm, and to be in favor of human dignity and human being. And we can talk about also for on the women movement in the country, who fight for justice for women. You know, they have a lot of success to criminalize rape, to criminalize, you know, violence against women. And also, and the way is long. It's long, but we continue to work to break this silo, to have one society where people can live with their dignity, with as a human being, and access to human rights and access to justice. Justice means for us, you know, not only to go having this capacity to go to the court, but also to live with respectful of our dignity and our human being, and also break this kind of structural process of exclusion, structural process of inequality, and also respect our culture, our ways of life was not respected because we are still on this neo-colonial or colonial behavior, colonial regards, you know, it's from the white supremacy, and to impose to Haitian knowledges and also Haitian ways of life as you know, inferior to what they plan to impose to the Haitian people.
Wow, thank you so much, Boumba. Again, really rich and so much in there to talk about. Now I have to do that awkward thing where I give the attorneys the code. So for those of you who are getting continuing legal education credits, the code for this session is LA022. That's LA022. Okay. And turning to Richard. So Richard, you already started talking a little bit about your story, but I wonder if you can talk more about how how formerly incarcerated people are excluded from these basic protections to be treated as a human being, and the strategies you're taking to fight some of those exclusions.
Absolutely. You know, I've watched the Department of Corrections go from the Department of Corrections Rehabilitation to simply the Department of Corrections. And if you read Florida Statute 944, it actually says in Florida law that punishment is our goal, rehabilitation is second. So you go in there and it is just an entire mentality of we're here to punish you. And somewhere along the way, they lose sight of your punishment is being separated from society. It's not to go in there and be dehumanized, marginalized, disenfranchised, and have your entire identity taken away. So recently I was talking about this, and in a name anymore, you're just a number. Well, now that's changed again, because now you're not really a number, you're a barcode. Because everything in the Florida Department of Corrections is for profit. And I'll give you an example. There's a food service company called Trinity. They provide the foods, DOC pays them based on the inmate count at midnight. So if an institution houses 1,200 inmates, they get paid for those 1,200 inmates. What they do is they run a spreadsheet and they say, okay, well, pancake breakfast, nobody's getting up for that. So they only cook enough for about maybe half the compound. If you're lucky, what happens then, they cut the rations of the portions so small that you're forced to go to the canteen. Trinity owns the canteen. So you have two companies, one supposed to feed you and one charges you for goods and services. Take it a step further, and everybody here who's been in college has at some point lived on ramen noodles. They're 10, 15 cents tops. And the Florida Department of Corrections, they're like 72 cents a piece. So you have this disconnect with the people in power and their management over people that are under their authority while they're incarcerated. And they think by all of these for-profit goods that they're making them pay, but they're really not. They're making their struggling loved ones out in society pay. And to me, that's so egregious that it drives me insane, because I know people whose moms are working 2 jobs just to try to pay the bills and send a little bit of money to their loved one incarcerated. Another thing, and there's some new rules that are being implemented to further isolate and eliminate people incarcerated from having communication with the outside world. One of the most recent ones is a rule proposal to only allow an inmate's attorney of record to do a legal call with him. Now, the problem with that is when somebody's sentenced in the circuit court and they send the sentencing package up to the Department of Corrections, it has your trial attorney of record listed. But your next step is an appeal. Under the Constitution, you're entitled to representation on direct appeal. If you decide to hire an attorney, now you can't talk to your attorney unless he proves to the Department of Corrections that he's now your attorney of record. Take it a step further, and you're in prison and you're at the post-conviction stage. Most people who can afford an attorney are not simply just going to hire somebody without talking to them. And you may talk to 4 or 5 different attorneys. So they're trying to eliminate that, which is further going to eliminate people's access to the courts. And once it gets in that aspect, and if you really look at the way that they write the laws here in Florida under Rule 3850, you have 2 years to file your state post-conviction motion, but 1 year to file your federal habeas corpus under 2254. They write it in a way to the uneducated layman in law that you have 2 years and 1 year, when in actuality, if you wait more than a year, you're forever barred because of a DEPA from filing your federal habeas corpus. Another complexity of that is due to COVID, nobody can get access to the law libraries now. And what it's creating, and the people that I talk to in there, it's a constant suffocation. We're going to continue to just suffocate you. We're going to separate you from everything that we can. My goal, and it's a very tall order, and it's going to take me several months because I just came out. But my goal is it's a fewfold. One, I'm in talk with the director of reentry and programs for the Florida Department of Corrections and bringing JLI here. And he's somewhat amenable to it because I was a law clerk for so long, and I explained to him the problem with the law clerk training manual. By getting in there, we're able to go in, bring a good curriculum, teach people the tools to properly access the court and redress the prison system when something's done wrong. The medical system, in my 23 years, I'd never seen a no-bid contract. They simply gave medical to Centuria. And what they did, they gave it such a low bid. They said, look, if you run over the budget, we'll just take it from the general welfare fund, which used to be the inmate welfare fund. They've taken that away, and that's now build another fence fund, put another dorm up fund. It's not, let's buy TVs, let's start programs, let's do something that's going to be beneficial and educational for the people in there. And it's very sad because statistically wise, 85% of all people incarcerated at some point are going to re-enter society. So it's my belief that if you are the gatekeeper of the prison system, then you're responsible for what you're sending back out to society. And if you continue to suppress people, marginalize people, disenfranchise people, what you're going to do is send somebody back out that is worse than they went in. My remedy to that when I was incarcerated was to create Storytime Dads, a book reading program where we recorded children or fathers reading to their children. Then we'd send the book and the DVD home to the child at no cost to the state, the parent, or the family. And in doing that, I learned some things. I learned that a lot of men who were reading a book to their child for the first time in their life had never had a book read to them in their life. So it's kind of like they were fulfilling something from their childhood. And that prodded me to create the SAGE program, which at the peak of it, we were teaching 14 classes a week. And the men that would come to it, I watched them change like nothing before, because we actually got community leaders, professionals to come in every day, sometimes 2 times a day, to teach these classes from their profession. And, I love what everybody talks about, community. It takes the community. I believe that there's a disconnect between community and those incarcerated, because it's ugly, it's scary. Nobody wants to talk about it. until your son or daughter goes to jail. And a lady that I'm consulting with right now, she's a professor and never knew anything about this until her son just caught 5 years in prison. Now she wants to be involved in the change. I believe that the conversation needs to expand and people need to hear more about what goes on inside of prison, what people need while they're in prison, and what we can give them when they get out. A very good friend of mine just did 17 years and got his associate's degree while he was in prison, which is a feat in Florida because they have not really been amenable to people going to college until a few years ago. So this young man comes home, he's excited, he's happy, he's worked hard. He can't get a job at Walmart, Burger King, he can't get a job anywhere. And he goes in and they're like, oh, you're great. Oh, your background. Nope. So he got a job with the AC company, worked for 2 weeks, best employee out of the gate, about to give him a truck. HR said, no, we have to let him go, his background. How are people supposed to not go back to which led them to prison if we as a society, if we as a community don't start giving people that chance? So those are a lot of the things that I'm talking about when I go into the community, when I meet with politicians, when I talk to attorneys, and especially when I talk to people in the Department of Corrections. And it's so hard to just tell people, you know, if you can, come home and find some type of niche to create your own business, do that. Because as it stands right now in Florida, there is very, very, very little opportunity for those formerly incarcerated citizens coming home.
Wow, thank you so much, Richard. And that image of suffocating, of, you know, already being inside a cage and then having the air taken away, that was incredible. And thank you for describing those really specific injustices that folks are facing every day and what you're doing about that. And you also mentioned the Jailhouse Lawyer Initiative, JLI. Sukti very helpfully put a link in the chat. That's the initiative. It's a partnership between Jody Polk's organization and the Bernstein Institute. So check it out. And thanks for that. So we have a bit of time left. So what I'd like to do, a little bit of time left, I should say, is just do one more round with whatever you would like to leave the folks with today, because this is the last panel. And so this will be the last round of the last panel. And so let me see if any of you would like to go first. You can sort of unmute and just go ahead. I see Gerardo.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coordinating this. I think that one thing that I want to close with, it's in regards to humanity, you know. What you were saying, Meg, makes a lot of sense in regards to education. And I'm total bias towards teachers because, you know, growing up, many of us didn't have an opportunity at an education. We had to stop and exchange books for tools at a young age, and then came here and continued doing this job, you know, producing food, all with the goal of feeding our families in a dignified manner. Our experiences very often are ignored as important or are assumed that they are supposed to be like that because that is agriculture in the US and that is agriculture in the world. Why? Because we forget that the people who are doing this job are not just hands to do the job. They are people with dreams. They want to also offer an opportunity to break the cycles of poverty that have been imposed on us. And it is something that brings a lot of expertise. A teacher, when I was 14 years old, my last day of school, middle school, that was it. He gathered us and he said, a few of you might be able to go and finish high school. Maybe 2 or 3 might be able to go to a university, and maybe 1 will be able to finish. Whatever the possibilities, do your best, do everything and honor your parents. And for those of you who haven't, who are not gonna be able to continue in school, remember this. Education doesn't only happen in the confines of a classroom. Education is the product of what we choose to learn in life, and most of it happens in life. So what I want to say is we need to reset how we think about basic things as education if we want to be able to connect in a better way with the communities that are trying, that are aiming to eliminate these abuses and are still limited by existing laws, on existing laws, lack of enforcement of laws, and all of that, and think about how to counterattack all of that in a community setting, and with the support of those who also will bring the most powerful manifestation of knowledge, which is when we combine what you all know and learn in your school about all the things, you know, the keeping up, the pushing the envelope, that's necessary. The last thing I want to say, it gives me a lot of hope, and I want to leave you all with an invitation. We are expanding, as I was mentioning, and in our expansion, we need to also expand our capabilities. And we're going to need good people to stand with us that understands these things that we are saying, because the most important thing for me as a worker is not to have somebody who knows everything about the law and comes to us and give us the best advice possible only, which is what we require of math always. but the goal here is, you know, for us to have the ability to dream, and for the lawyers to come with what they understand about the law to help us fly our dreams and land them where they need to be. And that's why the Fair Food Program is so unorthodox. It exists as a rare thing, but we are changing the conversation. We're part of the Worker-Driven Social Responsibility Network that we co-founded, and that is pushing the entire conversation in the US to basically debunk what needed to be debunked decades ago in terms of CSR approaches to social justice. It is time we do our own, and we are gonna need all of you in different forms, standing on the streets. We're gonna march on April 2nd to pass by the house of Nelson Peltz, one of the most powerful persons within Wendy's, the one who is holding basically back. And in doing that, and in also enrolling in doing this as a way of life. I mean, this is it for us. I mean, the way I see it, this is the promise, not just for us in agriculture. This is the promise for all of those that have been disenfranchised. If we are able to align the powers that can protect their ability to defend themselves and to use their voices to be able to craft a system that challenges the status quo. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay. Who would like to go next in our closing?
Yeah. My last word is to say, creating these spaces, energizing our work, create more hope for us to continue our struggle for justice. And I think one thing I learned from this panel is, we can't do our work without any compassion for the human being that we are working with, the humanity, and also the dignity. From there, the fight for justice will have more ownership from the communities, not only from the practitioners we are and the activists we are, or we can create a critical mass to all over the world, all over the communities where we are working and trying to connect those communities and to create this massive force, you know, to shape the law where the law is oppressive, or we can have better law to protect and secure rights, collective rights, right for the communities, right for ourselves to live without injustice, without violence. Just right now, we are discussing, but we know what's happening in the real world, where oppression using for disproportionate force, to impose what they want to do. It's now in front of this kind of behavior. We need to unify our energy, knowledge, and our expertise to shape the law and to using better the law to move toward justice around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Boumba. Who would like to go next? Richard.
Right, I'm gonna be really quick. Suki, could you drop that link in the chat for me? I would like to encourage everybody to read this article. This man's name is Doug Gilding. He's been incarcerated for 25 years for felony murder for a 10-minute conversation that occurred outside of his house, and he went to bed. We're working right now, and he wrote a bill to change the transferable intent element in felony murder, meaning that if somebody was a minor participant, then they will not automatically get a life sentence. It would cap it at no more than 15 years. And if you read the law, judges' hands are literally tied for everybody who participates in a felony, and it results in any type of death. Whether you were 1,000 miles away, if you heard that they may go rob somebody and it gets back to the cops, they're going to come arrest you. I won't say it right, but it was said earlier that, you know, justice takes a long time. Punishment comes quick. And it's so unfortunate. As far as I know, this article is the first article that the American Bar Association has ever published by an inmate. Amazing bill, and I just wanted to put that out there because I believe so much in this. I was personally affected by the felony murder law. I didn't commit the crime. I was down the road in my car. It cost me 23 years of my life. But thank you everybody for all the work you're doing, Meg, Suki, Tyler, just all of you are so amazing, and I love being a part of all of this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Such a privilege to be here with you. Okay, Matthew, Ariadna. We have Matthew.
Sure, I'll conclude. I just well, thank you so much for having us, and I just want to say, you know, I really appreciated Ariadna's comments in particular on sort of what it means to be a lawyer working on these issues and working in community and with communities. And since this is, like I said before, being hosted by a law school, I do think it's worth recognizing a few things. One is it's extraordinarily rare for law schools to recognize this type of work and to invite communities and organizations like the CIW to these conversations in such a prominent and like academic way. And I just want to thank you for that. And that has been true for NYU for a long time, both through your work here, which we've been involved in before. And also I know in attendance today is Noelle D'Amico, who's been a long time ally of the CIW and teaches at NYU as well. And it's just, it's been so great to have that relationship. And I don't know how many law students or early lawyers are in the audience, but I just want to put in a plug for how rewarding and inspiring it can be to do the type of work that Ariadna described as accompanying, or you could think of as supporting or backing community movements and efforts rather than leading, you know, as a lawyer. And it's really great work, and it offers the opportunity to do it with others who are not lawyers and to follow their lead on what your priorities should be and what the solutions should be. And it doesn't always, at least in my case, always or really almost ever involve going into court. It involves creating the space for other individuals to win the solutions that they want without having to confront the legal system. And there is quite a bit of creativity and excitement that can be done in that type of, you know, transactional, if you want to call it that, social justice lawyering too. So I would just encourage others to think about that. And again, thank you to everybody else who spoke and to the host of the panel.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Ariadna.
I want to join Matthew by saying that I wanted just to say thank you to Sukti, to Meg, to everyone that's behind this thing that started very small and now it has been like a huge summit with different tracks and everything. Because I think that one of the questions that, I don't know all of you, but it haunts me, is where do people like us, where can ourselves like find that sense of community? You know, we're always like very lost in very concrete strategies. We have to respond to emails, go to the court, like defend somebody, have a phone call, be at another Zoom meeting, go to a meeting with a public official and lose your time, or maybe gain something, like write reports, look for fundraising opportunities. But that sense of, when are we going to stop and just talk about why are we doing the work that we do? Have this emotional talk that it's sometimes very abstract, but it roots and it grounds and it like promotes and it nurtures the work that we want to like continue doing. So thank you, comrades, for finding the place, the common ground. Because if I were a student at this moment, I would enjoy just knowing that there's a community out there waiting for me to graduate and join the ranks. If I were an advocate anywhere, I would love like to know that there's a place that I can go and that I'm not gonna be different or a dreamer, I'm gonna be a builder. So thank you for help us like sharing a space. I've been like making contacts and I'm just like writing to Boumba, like, hi Boumba, we have a summit next month. What are you gonna be doing? We need you. So these things also work like networks. So I'm gonna be writing to you all, stalking all of you. And I hope it happens the same way, because we need like to keep this conversation going. And thank you.
Oh, Ariadna, perfect. Thank you so much. And really, thank you is too small. So I'll say gracias, thank you, and merci un peu. But I also just want to re-invoke everyone who made this happen, all of the panelists, all of you who are attending, who are really participants, and we look forward to being in touch. The advisory committee who put so much into this. Everyone at the Bernstein Institute, of course, especially Sukti, Tyler, Logan, Emesha, Mela, and now also the law review. Law review, we're so grateful to you. And also I want to just say how really brave it was of you to step outside of the traditional law review format and to join us here. So in order to close, I'd love to invite Sarah just to say hello and give us our farewell, to hand it back over to the student for a moment who is herself already a leader.
Thank you so much, Meg. I just wanted to thank you all again for joining the Critical Legal Empowerment Symposium. It's been so beautiful, and it's been so nice to learn from you. As everyone has emphasized throughout the symposium, I really hope that this isn't the end, and that's why I'm also glad that there's also the March 4th Community Action Workshop, just going to plug it, so that these can continue. These conversations continue onward. Again, I'm Sarah, I'm a managing editor for the Law Review, and we're so excited to publish some of this work in knowledge and memorialize it so that it can inform and influence future work. Gerardo mentioned our need to rethink what we consider as education, which was something I was just thinking about. And I think about this phrase that Marbury Stelly Butts, the executive director for Law for Black Lives, once said. She said that law school is the indoctrination of limitation. And I like to think that critical legal empowerment fights against that indoctrination by existing outside of and in tension with traditional legal constraints. So I like to think that community-built critical legal empowerment is limitless in its pursuit for justice. So again, thank you all. Meg thanked all the people I also wanted to thank, but thank you, Sukti, Meg, Tyler, and Logan, the Bernstein Institute. I can't imagine what our symposium would have been. Like, this is exactly the most beautiful symposium I could have imagined. So thank you. And thank you to our advisory committee, our speakers, and everyone that joined us. Thank you for your radical imagination, your attention, and for showing up. And again, I hope you'll join us on March 4th for the next Community Action Workshop.